I think in the interest of time management, we move straight to Tim's and take both together for questions at the end, and then that might be a neater way to handle things. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Mike, and a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. Jeremy started his presentation by outlining that milk actually has a really good story to tell, particularly pasture-based dairy, but we're not getting it through to the consumer just yet. My topic today is about how important that is to get it through, some of the reasons it's getting more complex to sell that message to consumers, and some couple of thoughts about what we might actually be able to do about it. But I'm going to start talking about superheroes and the concept of origin stories. I didn't grow up reading comic books when I was a kid, but my son Freddie, when he was 6 years old, and I used to read a story to him to go to bed at night, instead of sort of Dr. Seuss or the Bernstein Bears and things most kids want, he wanted the original comics on Batman, Spider-Man, and Superman. And what I learned going through those comics was that actually they have very powerful origin stories that really set the scene. What's an origin story? Well, it's the reason the superhero came to have its superpower or chose to do the things it did in life. So Batman's parents were killed in front of him by a burglar. He devotes his life to crime. We have Superman, who's ejected from planet Krypton from a superhuman race, brings that power to Earth, but has an almost like nut-like allergy to kryptonite as a result of that. And Spider-Man is bitten by a radioactive spider that enables him, in the right circumstances, to spin webs and jump from tall buildings to fight crime. The point being that the people who wrote these stories spent a lot of time talking about the origin story of the character that then set the path that character went on. And the audience always interpreted whatever that person did or whatever news came out about that superhero character through the lens of the origin story. In my view, origin stories are incredibly important in the food industry as well, and they're becoming more important. They're just getting harder to tell. So I'm going to run through why they're getting harder to tell and how quickly the context or environment in which we engage with consumers is changing. I'm going to talk about the fact that not all the markets that we sell into have the same priorities, and that's really important to realise. Then some examples of how industries are responding to this and what New Zealand might be able to do to head off the threats and capitalise on the opportunities. The first big change in terms of the context we're selling to consumers is that we're selling to different consumers and will be going forward. This is a map put together by the Food Aid Organisation looking at net trade in food. If you're in dark green, you have a big surplus of calories you send to the world. Light green, somewhat less surplus. Yellow, you go into deficit. Orange, you're in deep food deficit. And the key point for me is that if we then overlay the world's fastest growing economies, which are the emerging markets, we see that all of them are already in food deficit and are likely to go significantly more into deficit going forward. That means that New Zealand and the world's food exporters, more of our food production going forward is going to travel long distances through difficult supply chains to consumers who actually have different priorities to ourselves, which we're going to return to in a minute. So changing consumers that we actually sell to. In the consumer markets we're actually more familiar with, the advanced economies, like New Zealand's or the United States, UK, consumers of course also becoming more interested in more than just quality and price. These I hope you all would guess in terms of sustainability, animal welfare, fairness, and the provenance story behind it. That I know you know, but I want you to think about the fact that none of those traits are self-evident to the consumer when they buy the product and not self-evident when they actually consume it. I can eat a piece of land, but I do not know if it's really eco-friendly, animal fair, people fair, and comes from the farm which I actually think it's coming from, that's important to me. Which means we've got to get very good at telling our origin story, because all the premiums they're going to pay are on stuff they can't actually tell unless you can convince them it's true or produce proof. This is becoming difficult to do because trust in institutions is actually in decline at the moment. We read a lot about this at the moment, but I'll give a primary example. Monsanto is having a lot of problems at the moment, or Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, around glyphosate. Glyphosate is the world's most utilised and useful herbicide. There's a lot of science that says it's safe for users, it's safe for downstream consumers if it's used the right way. But we're seeing that science questioned because people don't trust Monsanto. And they're saying that studies were influenced by Monsanto or ghostwritten by Monsanto. And just because the science is there and the regulators say we believe the science, the consumer's not necessarily believing that anymore. And that's very difficult to deal with as a food company when that trust breaks down. We're also seeing social media rapidly change the food landscape. And this scares the hell out of the major food manufacturers in markets like the United States. Social media enables small companies to develop new brands, tailor the marketing to small groups, and get products up and running. If they succeed, they can spread the news through social media and develop niches that become big market shares quite quickly. To give you an idea of the impact of that, the top 25 food and beverage companies in the US account for just under half the entire market. Nielsen reckon in the last 4 years they've accounted for only 3% of growth in that category. All of it almost is being taken by smaller startups and mid-sized companies. This is changing things very quickly in how you speak to the consumer. Retail models are also starting to change here and abroad as we see online sales of food via things like Amazon and China, Alibaba. Changes again the environment we're selling to consumers. They're getting impressions of our product online rather than walking through physical outlets. It's a different conversation we're having. But perhaps the biggest game changer is that technology is enabling the people we sell food to use their smartphones to scan food products and trace back and find out enormous amounts of information about that product. Might be, is it the real thing? What's contained in it in terms of the ingredients? Where are the profits going? And is the accreditation something I'm comfortable with? And in time we may say blockchain provide all this sort of information via one scan of the product. Whether you think this is good or bad depends on how you use it. It's scary if the consumer doesn't like what you're doing. If you've got a good story, like the one Jeremy's outlining to tell, this could be really powerful. It's going to give you a mechanism to do that properly. So things are changing quickly, but not all of our markets we sell into prioritise the same characteristics of the food we produce. This is really big for New Zealand. We turn to the United States first. We see a number of things going on. Firstly, the media narrative on food supply chains is really negative at the moment. And we can see this through a quick perusal through films on the food industry in the last 13 years. Did anyone see the movie Super Size Me? Anyone? Yep, at least a couple. 2004. Now, the plot was this guy goes out and he lives only on McDonald's for a couple of months. And every time he gets asked, would you like a larger size fries or burgers, he says, yes. Not surprisingly, he gets quite sick doing this. But it was the first movie that really started highlighting or calling out the negativity of the fast food chains and what they were doing to American health. That really started the ball rolling. Next thing, this is actually a book, but Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma was really important in this space. The basic thesis was if you're an omnivore and you can eat everything, how does that work when everything becomes readily available as it has to us? and the problems that causes. We then saw movies come out in subsequent years, such as Fast Food Nation, King Corn, about the problems with having a corn-based diet, Food Fight. We saw Food Inc. talking about the negativities of industrial food in the US system. Ingredients, Farmageddon, which was about big corporates pushing out small farmers in the US. Forks Over Knives was a vegan flick. We saw The Harvest, which was about how badly workers are treated in the US supply chain. The Sushi, talking about how unsustainable rising desire to eat sushi is. We saw Fed Up, talking about how bad food policy was. The tagline here is fantastic. Congress says pizza is a vegetable. It's a real debate they had about whether you could count a pizza as a vegetable in a school lunch because it had tomato paste on it. GMO OMG, we saw That Sugar film, an anti-sugar film. Cowspiracy, talking about the damage they said cows are doing to the planet. Food choices, sugar-coated, and most recently, What the Hell and Hope, What You Eat Matters. And you don't have to watch all those. I actually have, and as a result, Netflix had me down for some kind of vegan social activist, which is not the case. I don't enjoy them, but I think it's important to know that they're there, because 13 years of filmmaking is telling US consumers the supply chain you rely on is producing food that's unhealthy, in a way that's environmentally harmful and abusive of both animals and employees and sometimes farmers. Change the way you eat or vote to deal with this. That's a pretty powerful message. And what we're starting to see is that people are having this conversation with each other and reinforcing that view through social media. There's evolving studies going on about how social media forms echo chambers. And the concept is Facebook, 2/3 of Americans now source news via Facebook. And Facebook doesn't send you any news, it curates the news. It sends you what it thinks you would like to hear. Also in Twitter, you tend to find people tweet and form groups of like-minded people who share that tweet. Have a look at this. I agree with this, don't you? Yep, we all agree. And this is a map a political map of tweeting during a US election campaign that was drawn. The left side, the blue, is the Democrat people. The right is the Republicans. And showing all the exchange of tweets and how much goes around in the same, of people of the same political view, and how little interchange there is between. And the concern is social media creates echo chambers. You just start saying and hearing the same thing, and you start to think that's the only view, it's the right view. And that takes what the media is saying, negative about food, goes into the echo chamber, hard to break customers out of that. So consumers are starting in the US to look for more natural, less industrial food. That's a key hot point. We see there the milk. We have ordinary milk. We have milk that's not treated with RBST, a genetically modified growth hormone. We have Dean Foods came out with a product called Dairy Pure. It's quite a smart play. They just emphasised everything that was true about milk already. There's no growth hormones in it. There's no antibodies. We quality test all the milk. It's shipped cold, and it comes from cows on healthy diets. And what that is anyone's guess. But they're just trying to dispel some common myths about the supply chain. We then see Danone, which calls itself Dannon in the States, moving towards a system where it's saying we're not going to use genetically modified feed to give an extra layer of claim. We, of course, then have some kind of pasture-raised system. Chipotle sources cheese that's pasture-raised. That doesn't mean purely pasture-fed. It means it's part of their diet and they have access to pasture. It's pasture-light. We then see organic, of course. We see organic grass-fed. And this might interest you because there's no actual grass-fed milk really in the US market sold at the moment that's not organic grass-fed. Grass-fed is seen as organic on steroids. That's a really bad analogy, but it's a hyper-organic product. And then if you really want something special, you can get organic Amish milk, which is made through old-fashioned systems. So, important thing to note, that companies are clamouring to find claims that are non-industrial. There's a spectrum of claims out here. Shows they're interested, also shows that they're very cluttered space to bring new claims in. In China, we have quite a different market. And we've been speaking to our team over there about, is safety still a huge concern for China? Because you, probably like me, haven't heard a lot of food scandals recently that used to happen regularly. Our guys there say absolutely it's the primary concern still. One reason for that is while we haven't had food scandals, we have this year had a major scandal whereby pharmaceutical companies were found to be issuing ineffective rabies vaccines that they knew to be ineffective. And that sounds a long way from infant formula, but the consumer of the rabies vaccine is still the one child that the parents have. So they've just been told again, my most precious thing that I have in my life is being serviced by a supply chain that is not actually delivering safe or effective products. And that has been a huge reminder to them. There's echoes of melamine in this, reminding them, I cannot trust my local supply chain unless it's very, very highly proofed. We also see ongoing issues with pollution. This was a movie called Under the Dome. It came out a few years ago, talking about how sick living in China makes you due to fine particulate pollution. I wasn't advised watching this. It's in Chinese and the subtitles are awful to follow. But the key point is they're constantly reminded every time they walk out the door, we live in a very sick environment. How could the food that we produce here be anything but impaired by this? And another concern they have at the moment, this movie was viewed about 100 million times and then it was taken off the internet in China. So we see censorship that they know about in China, which is reminding them, if information is key to understanding what my food supply chain, what's safe and what's not, can I really rely on the information I'm getting in this environment, which is increasingly managed? So those three factors are leading to imported sales rising rapidly, here showing Chinese imports of infant formula still growing at very high rates, and import penetration up to around 35% now. So supply chains in China are a big concern. They can kill new categories. A few years ago we saw a category develop very quickly. This translates badly, but it's called old yogurt. I think a traditional concept. This was doing really well. Then it came out that there was gelatin used in it to thicken it. And actually, there may have been leather used to make that gelatin. And then you saw cartoons like this making the analogies like someone putting their old shoes into your yogurt. And that pretty much killed off the category. So even without poisoning people, we see things that kill a category in China based on safety and traceability. Point of origin sustainability in China is much lower down the list in terms of imported foods. And I wanted to give you an example of that. The WWF do periodically a guide on who buys palm oil around the world and are they using certified sustainable palm oil or stuff from the bulk market that's not likely to be sustainable. And they go into a market like North America and they see that about 83% of the palm oil used is certified sustainable. China is the world's largest importer of palm oil. They don't really have any companies covered in the section, in the report, because the WWF says they're lagging a long way behind, and the very little sustainable palm oil sent into China is driven by multinationals. So, and this shouldn't surprise us. If you've got a society who are living where you cannot send your child outdoors necessarily every day and who will regularly get hospitalised with respiratory illnesses over the course of their childhood, and the waterways are poisonous, they're probably less interested in whether your waterways are swimmable as you're dealing with down here. I'm not saying that's not an admirable pursuit, I'm saying it's not their direct hot button, but your point of origin sustainability, and I think that this is strong illustration of that. So what are companies doing about this and how they're responding? In the US, they're trying to build up trust by various means, and including third-party accreditation. Danone, one of the largest dairy companies in the world, has just come out this year and said, we think trust in major companies is so broken in the food world, we're actually going to seek B Corp certification. B Corp stands for Beneficial Corp, basically means getting a third-party independent group to come in, certify the way you deal with your suppliers, your customers, your investors, your staff, and say you're well above normal standards in the way you deal with these people. We also see multi-level pitches cutting through, and I think this is a really important point. I'm referring here to a company called Fairlife, which is actually a joint venture between a US dairy co-op and the Coca-Cola company. It's having a lot of success in the fluid milk category. It's not pasture-based, it's not coming from a small farm, it's not organic. But they are tapping into lots of hot buttons as a package. They stress innovation, it's ultra-filtered high-protein milk. They talk about the farming in terms of the high quality of milk they're producing, the low cell counts. They talk about the sustainability of their farming. They're targeting carbon neutral, gas-powered transport plants, and they highlight the same nutritional benefits that Jeremy's talking about that dairy brings to your diet. And this is really successful at the moment. So you don't have to be just one thing. A wrap of various traits is often more effective. A couple of other examples. Chinese companies looking to tap into this demand for import by doing all sorts of things. This was just in the news last week, and so I thought it was interesting to refer to. Biostime, which is a company that largely sells infant formula in China, is launching a brand in the Australian market. And that's not because that market's growing or it's particularly lucrative. They're launching in the Australian market so Chinese tourists can come out and see it, and the Daigou shoppers who send product back can see it and say, oh yeah, this is a popular brand in Australia, it must be reliable and trustworthy, you should buy it in China. So it's just reinforcing that importance of offshore sourcing. And companies in China are producing clean products. This is my friend Sandy Chen's favourite product. The brand name Rushi means as is or truthful, all about clean labelling, no added nasties. So how can New Zealand dairy industry capitalise on the things that I've been talking about? So the first point I want to re-emphasise is New Zealand is in a unique position. You export 90% of your dairy products, and unlike the Dutch or the Irish, the majority of that's going to emerging markets. And this is creating a challenge to monetize sustainability, because the standards, the rising environmental standards, come from your local community you live with. Your customer base is somewhere else. So you don't have that luxury of living with people who care about the environment and then selling to them, which gives you a better chance of monetizing. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but I think we're mad if we don't recognise that reality. Secondarily, I believe that pasture base is a huge attribute, as is sustainability, but these things work better when you wrap it up in a package. And that package, you have to emphasise different things for different markets. So when you go into China, still safety, traceability, quality are going to be huge parts of the hot buttons. If you go into the US, it's going to be more about the naturalness, non-industrial part of the supply chain. And also another important one is opening up markets where sustainability is high on the agenda would be really beneficial. So as Brexit happens and New Zealand looks to negotiate free trade agreements with the EU and UK, they are markets that care more about sustainability. And hence, we should all be thrilled that our Irish friends are here offering to cooperate with us more, because they're going to go home and advocate that New Zealand gets more access to the European market going forward. So thank you for that. And also, it's I do believe that as we set up terms and make claims and try and capitalise on those offshore, it's important to define those terms so they really mean something, to meet whatever the things we say we're going to do, and to be able to prove them if we're going to have sustainable value from them in the market. And the final one, it's very important to stay in charge of your origin story. Batman, Spider-Man, they had origin stories no one could change. I want to leave you just with this thought. This is the real world. Origin stories can be rewritten. Product on your left, that used to be in the 1950s, known globally as, in China, as the macaque fruit, right? Because of the monkey that ate it. Fast forward to 2018, they're starting to call that the kiwi, which is an alliteration of kiwi. Taken a Chinese product, you've made it much better, and you've changed the provenance of it. But it doesn't always work that way. This is on the right-hand side, the macadamia nut. It was known globally as the macadamia nut, the local translations in the 1950s. The Hawaiians came to Australia where it originated, took it back, developed an industrial industry, sold it to the Chinese, and today, that's known as the Hawaiian nut. So, always bear that in mind. New Zealand, Ireland have great origin stories. We need to keep working on those because they can be rewritten if you don't watch out, and they can be rewritten by the wrong people. Thank you very much for your time.